Settle in, get comfortable. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room isn't what everyone warned you about. It's the moment someone stops being afraid of it. Chapter 1. The Gate. The gate had been fine yesterday. It had also been attached to the wall yesterday, which it was not now, because sometime between midnight and dawn, the Alpha King's wolf had decided the gate was a problem, and the wolf's solution to problems was not what anyone would call subtle. 3 pieces. The gate was in 3 pieces across the courtyard. A 4th piece, the iron hinge plate, complete with a section of wall still attached to it, had been carried approximately 40 feet and deposited next to the well. The placement was precise, deliberate. The wolf had set the hinge plate down the way a dog sets down a retrieved stick, with visible pride, with the clear expectation of praise, and with no apparent awareness that the stick was, in this case, structural masonry. Everett Croft stood in the courtyard at dawn and looked at what remained of the eastern stable gate and thought about abdication. Not seriously, not practically, just the way a man thinks about walking into the sea, briefly, longingly, without any intention of getting wet. "Fixed it," Tarm said. Everett closed his eyes. The gate was making a sound, a creaking sound, at night. It was unacceptable. "The sound is gone now. You're welcome." The gate had been creaking for 6 months. Everett had been meaning to have it repaired. The hinges needed oiling. A simple task. A task involving a small tin of oil and 4 minutes of labor. Tarn had chosen to address the matter at approximately 2 in the morning by ripping the entire structure off the wall and redistributing it across the courtyard in an arrangement that, to be generous, resembled a very aggressive art installation. "Your Majesty." Gil, the head handler, materialized at Everett's elbow with the expression of a man who had been managing this particular disaster for 9 years and had long ago accepted that his job was less wolf handler and more structural damage assessor. "We've secured the horses. No injuries. One of the yearlings bolted into the herb garden again." "The stable wall?" "Cracked. Same section as last time." Gil paused with the professional delicacy of someone delivering a quarterly report to a man who already knew the numbers were bad. "The mason says 1 more incident and the whole eastern face will need to come down." 1 more incident. As if incidents were unpredictable. As if the wolf were a weather system rather than an enormous silver-gray animal who had, in the last 3 months alone, removed a courtyard gate, herded 2 quarreling guards into separate buildings by physically pushing them with his body like a border collie managing unruly sheep, and dug a hole in the training yard large enough to constitute a defensive fortification because a mole had insulted him. The mole had not, as far as anyone could determine, actually done anything. It had simply been there. Tarn had taken this as a provocation. "The mole was aggressive," Tarn said, as if reading the thought. "I handled it." "You dug a trench." "A defensive perimeter. You'll thank me when the moles organize." Everett walked the courtyard, cataloging the damage. The real cost was not the gate. Gates could be rebuilt. The real cost was the thing he could see in the way the stable hands moved. The careful distance they kept from the eastern section. The way they tracked his movements with their peripheral vision, watching for the tell. The flicker of gold in his eyes, the stillness that came before a shift. They were not watching Everett. They were watching for the wolf. He had learned to hold Tarn very tightly. Years of practice. The wolf was simply too much, too large when shifted, too strong, too certain that every problem had a physical solution, and that the physical solution was always more force. Other alphas shifted with their packs, ran the borders, hunted in formation. Everett shifted alone, in controlled circumstances, with Gil and 2 senior handlers positioned at measured intervals, holding what were optimistically called containment protocols. and were actually just very thick ropes that Tarn found amusing. The protocols didn't work. Tarn didn't respond to commands, didn't respond to authority, didn't respond to the 63 techniques in the wolf management manual that Gil had been trained on. Tarn responded to one thing, which was his own internal conviction about what constituted a problem and what constituted a solution. And the gap between those two categories was where most of the property damage lived. Everett stood at the edge of the courtyard and looked at the cracked wall and felt the wolf settle underneath his ribs like a large, warm animal that had no idea it was the source of every problem in the room. Tarn loved the courtyard. Tarn loved the horses. Tarn loved the stable gate, which was why he'd destroyed it, because it was making a sound, and sounds near things he loved were unacceptable, and the fastest way to stop a sound was to remove the thing making it. That was the part nobody understood. Tarn wasn't aggressive. Tarn was helpful. Tarn was relentlessly, catastrophically, irrevocably helpful. And the difference between an aggressive wolf and a helpful one was largely a question of property insurance. There's also the matter of the petition, Gil said, carefully, the way a man introduces the subject of a landslide while standing at the bottom of the hill. The petition. Alderman Marsh. 3 weeks. Marsh was not an unreasonable man. He was a senior council member with 30 years of service and a legitimate grievance, which was that 6 months ago, Tarn had spooked a horse in the lower paddock. Not intentionally, not maliciously, just by being an enormous wolf who materialized at the fence line because he'd heard a sound he wanted to investigate. And the horse had bolted, cleared the rail, broken its leg on the stone path, and had to be put down. Marsh's daughter had raised that horse from a foal. She was 14. She had not spoken to any member of the palace household since. Marsh's petition was formal, well-drafted, and, on every point except the conclusion, correct. The king's wolf was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and had caused material harm to persons and property on 6 documented occasions. The petition requested a formal assessment of the wolf's threat level, and, if the assessment confirmed what everyone already knew, permanent confinement. Permanent confinement meant a cell. It meant Tarn locked in a stone room in the lower palace, shifted or not, for the rest of Everett's life. It meant the animal layer of his own mind caged not just figuratively, but literally. A wolf in a box, an arm amputated while still attached. The vote was in 3 weeks. The livestock trainer arrives today, Gil said. The one the Southern Pack recommended. Horses are her specialty, but they say she's good with, he searched for the word, difficult animals. Everett looked at the gate. The gate did not look back, because it was in 4 pieces. Send her to me when she gets here. Josie Lowe arrived at 10:30 with a rope coiled over one shoulder, 3 leather satchels of varying size, and the posture of someone who expected the world to contain problems and was not particularly bothered by this. She did not bow when she entered the study. She did not curtsy. She stood in the doorway and looked at Everett the way she looked at everything, directly, calmly, as if she were reading the page he was on before deciding whether the book was worth opening. She was lean the way people who work outdoors are lean. Wire muscle under sun-browned skin, forearms freckled from weather, hands that were calloused and practical, and had clearly spent more time holding lead ropes than anything decorative. Dark brown hair pulled back in a braid that was already losing the fight against itself, strands escaping at her temples and along her neck. Warm brown eyes. No jewelry, no affect. She smelled like hay and horse leather and clean, open air, and underneath it something warmer, something that made Tarn lift his head inside Everett's chest and pay attention for the first time in months. "What's that?" Tarn said. "You're the trainer," Everett said. "Josie Lowe. You've got 7 horses that won't let anyone near them. I'd like to see them before we talk." Not "Your Majesty." Not "It's an honor." Just her name and her first demand, delivered with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who considered royalty an administrative category rather than a reason to adjust her posture. The horses were spooked by a series of incidents in the stables, Everett said. Structural disruptions. The eastern wall has been compromised and there's been noise, disturbances. Your wolf, she said. He stopped. She was looking at him, not at the room, not at the desk, not at the window behind him. At him. Specifically at the line of his jaw, at his shoulders, at the way his weight was forward on his feet, at the way his fingers were curled slightly inward against his thighs. She was reading him. The same way she read horses. The body before the words, the tension before the explanation. I can see it, she said. The way you're standing. You're holding yourself like a horse with a badly fitted bit, working against something in your own mouth. Your wolf is right there, isn't it? Close to the surface. Nobody had ever said this to him. Not Gil, not the council, not any of the handlers who had spent years developing protocols for managing the wolf from the outside. She'd been in the room for 45 seconds, and she could see the thing he'd spent a decade hiding. She can see me, Tarn said. Delighted. Absolutely, unreservedly delighted. Can we keep her? The horses, Everett said. I'll have Gil take you to the stable. I'd rather go alone. Horses don't settle with an audience. She adjusted the rope on her shoulder. And your handler smells like metal and stress. The horses can smell it too. That's not helping. She turned. She was almost through the door when she stopped, looked back at him and said, not unkindly, but without any particular softness either. Everything with teeth happens, Your Majesty. The question is whether it happens on your terms or theirs. Then she was gone. The study smelled like hay and leather and clean air, and Tarn was saying, again, bring her back. More of that. The thing she just did, do that again. And Everett uncurled his fingers from his palms and stood very still in the middle of his study and breathed through the specific, unmanageable problem of a woman who had read him like an open book in under a minute. He could still smell her. Iron and pine and mountain cold, his own scent, were suddenly crowded by hay and warm skin. The trace of her lingered in the room, the way sound lingers in a bell after it's struck. Her, Tarn said. Quiet now. The delight condensing into something more focused, more certain. That one. That's the one. Everett closed his eyes, uncurled his hands, breathed. Chapter 2. The First Sit. She heard the wolf at 11 o'clock at night. She'd been in the stable, working late. The bay mare, the worst of the 7, a horse so thoroughly frightened that she pressed herself into the far corner of her stall and trembled when anyone came within arm's length, had finally let Josie stand in the stall with her. Not touching. Just standing. Breathing. Being a body that was present without being a threat. That was the first step with any scared animal. Prove that proximity is not danger. Prove that you can be near something without needing to control it. He's out there, Thistle said. Josie had been aware of Thistle's observation for approximately 3 seconds before Thistle said it. The animal part of her mind, the part that tracked sounds and movement and the direction of wind without being asked, had already catalogued the heavy footfalls outside the stable. Too deliberate for a person. Too measured for a loose animal. Something large, moving with purpose. She went to the stable door, eased it open, looked out into the courtyard. The wolf was enormous. She'd been told he was big. The handler's report had said significantly oversized. The Southern Pack Alpha who'd recommended her had said, you'll want to see it for yourself. None of that had prepared her for the scale of the animal standing in the courtyard under a half moon, silver-gray coat catching the light, gold eyes bright and focused and aimed directly at the remnants of the eastern gate. He was trying to fix it. The wolf had a piece of the gate in his mouth, one of the broken planks, splintered at both ends, and he was holding it up against the wall where the gate had been, trying to fit it back. The plank was too short. The wall section it had been attached to was gone, The wolf set the plank down, studied the gap, picked up a different plank. This one was too wide. He tried to angle it. It fell. He picked it up again. Josie leaned against the stable door frame and watched. The wolf tried the first plank again, then the second, then the first, then a third piece that was mostly just splinters. He held the splinters against the wall with his nose, and they immediately fell. He looked at the fallen splinters. He looked at the wall. He picked the splinters up and tried again. "He's been at this for a while," Thistle observed. "Flat. Factual. Yeah. He broke the gate, and now he's trying to put it back. Yeah. It's not going to work. No. Are you going to go out there?" Josie walked into the courtyard. The wolf's head came up. His whole body went rigid, ears flat, weight dropping, the posture of an animal that had been caught doing something it knew it wasn't supposed to do, and was bracing for the net, the shout, the containment protocol, the 63 techniques from the manual that told him he was a problem to be managed. She stopped 10 feet away, stood still, let him see her, let him smell her, hay and horse leather, and the particular calm that she carried the way other people carried tension. She'd been doing this her entire life. Not with wolves, with horses and mules, and one extremely hostile barn cat and a goat that had been so frightened of people it wouldn't eat for 3 days. The scared ones. The ones that had been told, by every interaction they'd ever had, that they were too much or too broken or too dangerous to be near. She waited. The wolf watched her. He did not run. He did not lunge. He stood with the broken plank still in his mouth and his gold eyes on her face, and he waited for her to do the thing everyone did, which was decide he was a threat. "That's not going to work," she said. The wolf's ears shifted, not flat anymore, slightly forward, listening. "You broke it. It's broken. That's done." She kept her voice even, the same voice she used with the bay mare, calm, direct, containing no lie. "Stop trying to fix it and sit down." The wolf sat down. The plank dropped from his mouth and clattered on the stone. He sat with his haunches on the cold courtyard ground and his enormous head level with her chest and his gold eyes on her face, and he was sitting. He was sitting because she told him to, and inside the stable, the bay mare shifted in her stall, and somewhere in the palace, Josie could feel the weight of the thing that had just happened pressing against the walls of a very carefully managed world. She stepped closer, slowly, the way you move toward a horse that's been beaten. No sudden gestures, palm open, letting the animal decide. She extended her hand, flat, fingers relaxed, and rested it on the bridge of his muzzle. The wolf went still, not the braced stillness from before, a different kind. The kind of still that a body does when something stops hurting for the first time. She could feel the muscles of his muzzle under her hand, the coarse silver fur, the warmth of him, the massive slow engine of his breathing. His gold eyes were on her, and they were not frantic, and they were not feral, and they were not what anyone had ever described as dangerous. They were the eyes of a wolf who had never been touched by someone who wasn't trying to hold him down. "You're not dangerous," she said. "You're just solving the wrong problems." The wolf leaned into her hand, the weight of his head, the trust of it, the simple, devastating animal logic of, "You touched me without fear. I will give you everything." "Well," Thistle said, flat, dry, almost imperceptibly warm. "That's going to complicate things." He felt all of it, every second of it, one body, her hand on his muzzle, the calluses of her palm, the hay and leather warmth of her. The way the world got very small and very quiet the moment she touched him. The way Tarn stopped running, stopped the constant low hum of, "Should I fix that? What about that? Is that a threat? "That sound is wrong," and just sat. Inside the stillness of her hand, he shifted back alone in his chambers at midnight, with the courtyard still on his skin and her voice still in his ears. "Stop trying to fix it and sit down." And he stood at his window, and his hands were at his sides, and they were open, which they never were, and the trace of her scent was still on his muzzle-turned jaw, hay and leather and clover honey, and the part of him that governed and managed and held everything in precise, controlled architecture was aware that something had just changed at a structural level, and that no protocol existed for this particular problem. "When can we see her again?" Tarn said. Not a question, an announcement of priorities. "She's here for the horses." "The horses are fine. When can we see her?" "Tarn." I sat down. For her. I have never sat down for anyone. I sat down and it was easy, and she smelled like home, and I would like to do that again, please. Everett pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window and closed his eyes. He summoned her to the study at 7 the next morning. She arrived at 7:30, which he suspected was deliberate. "I want to hire you," he said, "not for the horses." I gathered. She leaned against the doorframe, the same posture as yesterday, as if door frames were designed specifically for her to lean on while making powerful men feel off balance. "For the wolf." He searched for the right word. Managed, contained, rehabilitated. Every word he reached for carried the assumption that the wolf was a thing to be fixed, and even as he reached for them, he could hear how she would dismantle each one with a single sentence. "For me," he said. Something shifted in her face. Not softness, more like a door opening 3 inches instead of 2. She looked at him the way she'd looked at the wolf. Directly, calmly, deciding whether the book was worth opening. "There's a petition before the council," he said. "A formal request for the wolf to be assessed and permanently confined. The vote is in 3 weeks. He kept his voice level, political, the managed version. "If I can't demonstrate that the wolf responds to direction, that he's capable of restraint, the vote will pass." "What happens if it passes?" "He gets a cell in the lower palace, stone walls, iron door." He paused. "For the rest of my life." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him, reading the thing underneath the political summary, which was a man telling her that a piece of his own mind was 3 weeks from being locked in a cage, and asking for help the way men like him asked for help, with the vocabulary of governance and the grammar of a formal request and none of the words that would make it honest. "You want me to teach you how to be a wolf? I know how to be a wolf." "No, you know how to let a wolf happen to you." She crossed her arms. "That's not the same thing." There was a silence. In the silence, Tarn said, "She's right, Everett. She's exactly right. Please hire her immediately. Offer her whatever she wants. We have a treasury." "What would it involve?" Everett said. "Sessions, daily, you and me. Sometimes shifted, sometimes not." She looked at the study, at the heavy desk and the iron sconces and the formal weight of the room. "Not in here. Somewhere with space. And no handlers. The handlers are a safety. The handlers are an audience. You can't learn to trust your own body with 6 people holding ropes and clipboards ready to write down everything you do wrong." She straightened from the doorframe. "I'm not going to manage your wolf, Your Majesty. I'm going to introduce you to him. You've been living in the same body for 28 years and you haven't met." Tarn, inside his chest, was vibrating. There was no other word for it. The wolf's entire emotional register was condensed into a low, steady hum of recognition and joy, and the specific, devastating gratitude of being described accurately for the first time. "When do we start?" Everett said. "We already started. Last night." He sat down. "That was the first lesson." What was the lesson? She smiled. The first real one. It changed her whole face, sunlines at the corners of her eyes, a crookedness to it that suggested she smiled more with the left side than the right, the warmth of it arriving like weather. That he wants to be good for somebody. He just hasn't had anybody to be good for. She left. The study smelled like hay and clover honey. Tarn was humming. Everett's hands were open at his sides, and he could feel the phantom warmth of her palm on a muzzle he was no longer wearing, and he thought, I am in very serious trouble. Chapter 3. Closer. She started with breathing. Breathe in through the nose. Hold it. Now let the wolf breathe with you, not after, not against. With. They were in the training yard, mid-morning, under a sky that threatened rain without delivering. She'd chosen the yard because it had space and a fence and no formal furniture, no desk to hide behind, no study walls to hold the political mask in place. He breathed. He could feel it, the split. The way his lungs wanted one rhythm and the animal underneath wanted another, the way he'd spent years breathing against Tarn instead of with him, the way his whole body was a finely calibrated system for keeping two engines from running at the same speed. You're fighting it, she said. She was close, 3 feet. He could smell her, the clover honey thread stronger in the morning, warmer, mixed with damp grass from the walk across the grounds. I can see it in your shoulders. Stop bracing. I'm not bracing. You've been bracing since you were 15. Your whole body is a fist. She stepped closer, 2 feet. Her voice was professional and her proximity was not, and neither of them acknowledged the gap. May I? She put her hand on his chest. He stopped breathing. Her palm was flat over his sternum, fingers spread, feeling for the rhythm. She was looking at his chest, not his face, which meant she couldn't see his eyes, couldn't see the ring of gold that surfaced at the edges of his irises and stayed because Tarn was not quiet under her hand. Tarn was fully, desperately present, and the wolf's attention was fixed on the point where her skin met his shirt with a focus that bordered on religious. Your heart's going too fast, she said. I'm aware. Slow it down. I'm trying. You're not trying. You're performing trying. There's a difference. She pressed slightly harder, not pushing, grounding. The warmth of her hand through the thin linen, the calluses, the steady fact of her. Stop thinking about how to slow it down and just let the wolf set the pace. He knows what the right rhythm is. Your body already knows. You've just been overriding it. He closed his eyes. She was 2 feet away. Her hand was on his chest. She smelled like clover honey and hay and the specific warmth of someone who had been walking in morning grass, and his heart was a traitor, and his wolf was a traitor, and his own body was the least reliable instrument in any room she occupied. He let go. Not of everything. Not of control, not of the mask, not of the architecture. Just of the breathing. He stopped trying to set the rhythm and let Tarn in. And the wolf did what the wolf always did when given an inch. He took the whole road, but gently, so gently, settling the heartbeat into a slower, deeper pulse that was more animal than human, that matched something old and certain in the back of his chest. There, she said, quiet. Right there. Feel that? He felt it. For the first time in his life, he felt his wolf and his body running at the same speed. The engines synchronized, and the sensation was so foreign and so right that something in his throat tightened, and he had to open his eyes to keep it from going further. She was looking at him. Her hand was still on his chest. She was close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes and the particular way she held her mouth, slightly parted, the bottom lip fuller than the top, a face that was not constructed for beauty but was beautiful anyway. Beautiful the way weather was beautiful, by happening without intention. He looked at her. She looked at him. Her hand on his chest, his heartbeat, finally slow, finally right, under her palm. "She knows," Tarn said, very quiet, almost reverent. "She knows what we sound like when we're not broken." Josie removed her hand, stepped back, cleared her throat. "Good. Same time tomorrow." She walked away, didn't look back. Her braid was coming undone at the bottom, and there was a piece of grass on the back of her shirt, and Everett stood in the training yard with his wolf humming under his ribs and his heart still running at the pace she'd set, and did not move until she was out of sight. "Thistle," Tarn whispered. The wolf's name for her wolf, offered to the empty air like a gift left on a doorstep. Thistle. 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 The sessions continued. Each one was worse. Worse in the way that water is worse when you're thirsty. More of the thing you need, offered in quantities specifically designed to remind you that you can't have it. Session 3. She taught him to let the wolf surface partially. Eyes, stance, instinct, the predator layer, without the full shift. Let the gold come into your eyes. Let the weight drop forward. Don't fight it. Just let it be there. He let the gold come. She watched it happen with the clinical focus of someone assessing a horse's gait, noting the way his posture changed, the way his weight shifted, the way his hands went from human curved to something straighter, fingers slightly spread, the hands of a man whose body was remembering what it was built for. "Good," she circled him. "Professional, assessing." Her hand landed on his shoulder and adjusted the line of it. Firm, impersonal, the way a trainer adjusts a horse's posture. Then it moved to his jaw. She tilted his head slightly. "You carry tension here. Always. Even when the rest of you relaxes, this stays locked." Her fingers were on his jaw, her thumb at the hinge. His eyes were gold, and her face was 8 inches from his, and the training yard was empty, and the morning was gray, and the distance between professional and personal was a line she was standing on with her thumb on his jawbone. "Relax it," she said. He relaxed it. The muscle under her thumb softened. His jaw loosened. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes, gold, stayed on hers. "Lean forward 3 inches, Tarn suggested. "Just 3 inches. That's barely anything. That's practically standing still. No one would even notice." Josie removed her hand. "Better. Now shift." He shifted. In the yard, in front of her, no screen, no protocol, just a man and then a wolf. And the wolf was enormous and silver gray, and his gold eyes were on her face. And his tail was doing a thing that tails do when the animal is trying very hard to be dignified and is failing. "I am calm," Tarn announced. "I am perfectly calm. I am the calmest wolf in the kingdom. Nothing could disrupt my composure. I am a model of—" A bird landed on the fence. Tarn lunged. Not at the bird, after the bird, which was a distinction that mattered technically but not practically, because the result was a 160-pound wolf launching himself over the training yard fence and through the garden border and into the herbalist's plot, where he crashed through a row of lavender bushes before the bird escaped to a height that even Tarn's optimism couldn't bridge. He stood in the destroyed lavender, chest heaving, tail still going, surrounded by crushed purple flowers and the strong herbal smell of his own destruction. "I got close," he said. "Very close. Did you see?" She was watching. She saw how fast I was. Josie looked at the wolf in the lavender. The wolf looked at Josie. Between them lay a flattened garden, a broken fence rail, and a silence that was trying very hard not to be a laugh. "We'll work on impulse control tomorrow," she said. 14 days until the vote. The herbalist lavender was now evidence. Josie had heard the name Marsh twice this week, from Gil, who mentioned it the way you mention weather that's coming, and from a stable hand who didn't realize she was listening. The petition had support. She looked at the wolf sitting in the destroyed garden with his tail going and his gold eyes bright with the absolute conviction that he had performed magnificently, and she thought, 14 days. And every branch he breaks is another line in Marsh's case. He sat down, though, Thistle said. He sits every time. That's not nothing. Session 5. Tarn brought her a gift. She was setting up in the yard when the wolf appeared. Everett shifted and waiting, enormous and pleased, with something in his mouth. He trotted toward her with the focused purpose of a large dog bringing a ball, except the object in his mouth was not a ball. It was a branch, a substantial branch, from a tree that had, until recently, been intact. He set it at her feet, stepped back, sat down, looked at her. She looked at the branch. She looked at the wolf. The wolf's tail moved once, twice, restrained but present. The wolf equivalent of a man straightening his tie before an important meeting. "Thank you," she said. "She likes it," Tarn said inside what was technically Everett's mind, but was functionally just Tarn at this point. "Bring another one. A bigger one." Session 6. The gift was a log. Not a branch, a log. She didn't ask where it came from. She suspected it was structural. Session 7. Part of a bench. She held the bench slat in her hands and looked at Everett, who was back in human form and standing at the edge of the yard with the expression of a man who had just realized his wolf had been dismantling palace furniture and presenting it to a woman as courtship offerings. "He's courting me," she said. Not a question. Everett opened his mouth, closed it. A flush climbed his neck from collar to jaw, slow, visible, the kind of color that has nowhere to hide on a fair-skinned man standing in full morning light. He looked at the bench slat. He looked at the yard. He started to say something that began with, "He doesn't," and abandoned it halfway through because the evidence was right there in her hands. 12 inches of dismantled palace furniture, and the defense was not going to survive cross-examination. He pinched the bridge of his nose, stood very still. The stillness of a man who has been outmaneuvered by his own biology and has decided to just stand in the wreckage and see what happens. "He brings gifts," Everett said. "It's instinctual." "I know what it is. I work with animals." She turned the bench slat over. "He's escalating. Branch, log, bench. If I stay another week, he'll bring me a wall." "A wall is a good idea," Tarn said brightly. "We have several. She could pick." Everett pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'll replace the bench." "Don't bother. It's sweet." She set the slat down. "The bench is sweet, I mean. The courtship is—" She stopped. She was looking at him and he was looking at her, and the sentence she had started contained a word she was not going to say out loud in a training yard at 9 in the morning with his wolf listening. She was going to say mutual, Tarn supplied helpfully. I am almost certain she was going to say mutual. "Can you ask her? Just ask. It's easy. You just open your mouth and—" "Same time tomorrow," Josie said. She turned. She walked away. There was a piece of straw in her braid, yellow against dark brown, caught in the plait above her left ear. And Everett took 3 steps after her without deciding to, and his hand reached for the straw without consulting him. And she turned at the sound of his step, and his fingers were in her hair and their hands met. They stood in the yard, his fingers in the straw in her braid, her hand raised to see what he was reaching for, their knuckles touching. The morning air full of hay and clover honey and iron and pine, and between them a silence that had a texture to it, a weight, the specific gravity of 2 people who have been pretending very hard that their bodies are not doing exactly what their bodies are doing. She could see the gold at the edges of his eyes, close, bright, not a flash, a presence. The wolf right there, looking at her through his eyes. Not trying to escape, but just present, attending, watching her with an attention that was not human, that was older and simpler and more honest than anything the man had shown her. "Straw," he said. His voice was low, lower than usual, half an octave closer to a register that wasn't entirely his. "Thanks." Neither of them moved. The straw was out of her hair. His hand was still in the air where her braid had been. Her hand was still raised. The distance between them was 6 inches and closing, and the morning was gray and the yard was empty and... She stepped back. He let her. He didn't close the distance. He didn't chase. She noticed. She noticed that he didn't chase. She noticed it the way one wolf notices another holding still. Not with relief exactly, but with the sharp, clear awareness that something has just told her a truth about what kind of animal this is. A wolf that gives ground is not retreating, it is choosing. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow." She walked away. He stood in the yard. His hand was still raised. The straw was in his fingers, yellow and ordinary and smelling faintly of her. "We should keep that," Tarn said. Everett kept it. He put it in his desk drawer next to the border correspondence and the council agendas and a small jar of oil that he had been meaning to use on a gate that no longer existed, and he did not examine why, and Tarn did not make him. "She didn't run," Tarn said. Quiet now. The cheerfulness softening into something more careful, more tender. The wolf's delight settling into the patient stillness of something that wanted very much to be permanent. "She never runs. Everyone runs. She doesn't." Everett sat at his desk and looked at the straw and said nothing, and Thistle, on the other side of the courtyard, in the other body, said, "You're staring at the stable wall again." And Josie said, "I'm thinking." And Thistle said, "You're staring at his window." And Josie said, "That's the same thing." And Thistle, who was deadpan about everything and sincere about nothing, was quiet for a moment and then said, "It is, isn't it?" And it was the warmest thing she'd ever said. Chapter 4. The Cage. The visiting pack arrived on a Tuesday. 3 betas and a delta from the Northern Ridge, here for a border arbitration that had been on the council's agenda for 6 weeks, and on Everett's desk for 3. Standard diplomatic business. Territorial markers, grazing rights, the administrative texture of a kingdom that mostly ran itself while its king stood in a training yard learning how to breathe. Alderman Marsh was in the chamber, 3rd seat from the left. He was always in the chamber. It was his right as senior counsel, and his attendance had become conspicuously perfect since the petition was filed. He sat with his hands folded and his face composed, and watched every meeting the way a man watches a building he expects to fail an inspection. 5 days until the vote. The session that morning had been good, better than good. Josie had talked him through a partial shift, wolf eyes, wolf stance, the predator layer surfacing in his human body without the full change. And for the first time it hadn't felt like a performance. It had felt like opening a door he'd been leaning against for years and discovering that the thing on the other side wasn't trying to get out. It was just standing there, waiting. She'd put her hand on his arm afterward. Not as a trainer, just a hand on his arm, her fingers against the inside of his wrist where his pulse ran, and she'd said, "You felt that, right? That was you. Both of you. At the same time." And he had felt it, and the feeling had followed him out of the yard and through the corridors and into the council chamber where the Northern Ridge delegation was waiting with their documents and their territorial claims. The arbitration was routine until it wasn't. One of the betas, tall, loud, the kind of man who treated volume as a substitute for authority, disagreed with the council's proposed boundary line. Disagreed vocally. Disagreed in the direction of Everett's scribe, A quiet beta named Fern who was taking notes in the corner and who did not deserve to have a man twice her size standing over her with his finger pointed at her documents, as if the documents were personally responsible for the northern tree line being 200 yards further south than he wanted. Tarn surged. Not outward, not visibly. Inside. The way the wolf always surged. A sudden tidal pull of every instinct he had, every piece of the animal that was built to protect and was being told, every single time, that protecting was the problem. Tarn wanted to stand. Tarn wanted to cross the room. Tarn wanted to put himself between the loud man and the quiet woman and make the loud man understand, in terms that required no translation, that he had made an error. "I could fix this," Tarn said. Bright. Helpful. The same register he used for gates and moles. "I could fix this very quickly. 1 second. Maybe 2. He would be significantly quieter afterward. Not injured, just rearranged. Everett locked him down. The way he always had. The cage. The practiced, internal, years-old architecture of containment that kept the wolf inside the walls and the king on the surface. He held the meeting. He spoke calmly. He resolved the dispute with words and authority, and the kind of measured diplomatic precision that the council had spent a decade training into him. The loud beta apologized. Fern returned to her notes. The delegation left. Marsh stayed. He stayed the way he always stayed. Folded hands, composed face, watching. He had seen it. Not the surge. Nobody without a wolf would have seen the surge. But the tell. The ring of gold at the edges of Everett's eyes. The half-second of absolute stillness before the measured diplomatic response. Marsh was not a shifter, but Marsh had lived among them for 60 years, and he knew what a wolf pushing against a locked door looked like from the outside. He caught Everett's eye as he left. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His expression said, 5 days. Afterward, alone in the corridor, Everett put his back against the wall and his hands on his knees and breathed through the cost of it. He was going to hurt her, Tarn said. Not cheerful, not bright. The wolf's voice was flat and confused, and something underneath it was hurt. He was too close, and he was too loud, and his hand was near her face, and I could have stopped it. I could have stopped it in 1 second. Why did you stop me? Because it's a council session. Because there are protocols. Because the wolf of the Alpha King does not intervene in diplomatic. I wasn't going to eat him. I was going to stand up. Standing up is not a diplomatic incident. Standing up is standing. I stand in the courtyard all the time. Nobody writes a report about the courtyard. Because it's a council session. There are protocols. She was scared. I could feel her heartbeat from across the room. 40 feet. She was scared and you held me back. The confusion was still there, but something had drained out of the cheerfulness underneath, leaving the hurt exposed. I'm not a gate, Everett. I wasn't breaking something. I was trying to help. The corridor was empty, the torches guttered. Everett's hands were shaking. The effort of the suppression was physical, a headache building behind his eyes, his muscles locked, the exhaustion of holding a very large thing inside a very tight space for 40 minutes while pretending nothing was happening. He didn't hear her approach. He smelled her. Hay, clover honey, the familiar warm thread. And then she was there, standing at the end of the corridor, and she could see it. She could always see it. The way she could see a bit-sore horse favoring one leg, the way she could read pain in an animal that was trained to hide it. What happened? She said. He told her. The visiting beta, the scribe, Tarn's surge, the lockdown. He told it the way he told everything. Measured, managed, the political summary version, the version that had been edited for composure. She listened. She listened with her whole body, the way she listened to horses. Still, present, her weight settled, nothing about her that suggested she was waiting for her turn to speak. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. He was protecting her, Josie said. He was going to cause an incident. He was going to stop someone from getting hurt. That's not dangerous, Everett. That's a pack leader. The use of his name, not Your Majesty, not Sire, just Everett. Plain and direct, and without any of the formal distance she'd maintained for 3 weeks, hit him somewhere under the ribs. She said my name, Tarn said. Still hurt, still confused. But a flicker of the old brightness surfacing, the way light comes through a crack. She said our name. She knows our name. You don't understand. If I let him act in those moments, in council, in public, he'll what? Protect people? She stepped closer, not retreating, moving in. I've spent 3 weeks with that wolf. I've watched him try to fix a gate he broke. I've watched him bring me a bench because he wanted to give me something and he didn't know what gift-giving looks like when you've never been allowed to do it. I've put my hand on your chest and felt you and him running at the same speed for the first time in your life. And you're telling me he's too dangerous to let into a council chamber when someone is being threatened? It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. He's not the problem, you are. You've decided he's a monster, and every time he proves he's not, you put him back in the cage and pretend the cage is keeping everyone safe. The cage isn't keeping anyone safe. The cage is keeping you from having to trust yourself. She was angry. Not the surface kind, the deep kind. The kind that lives under 3 weeks of watching someone fight his own nature and deciding to believe in him anyway, and then watching him, in the moment that mattered, reach for the lock instead of the leash. Everett said nothing. His jaw was locked. His hands were fists. The architecture was back in place, every brick, and she was looking at it the way she would look at a horse with a badly fitted bit. With fury and compassion and the particular grief of someone who knows exactly what the animal could be if someone would just stop breaking it. I can't do this, she said. The words landed like stones. I can't keep standing in a yard teaching you to breathe while you walk into rooms and hold your breath. I can't keep showing you who you are and watching you choose to be someone smaller. She was shaking, her hands, her jaw, the line of her shoulders. I work with scared animals. I know what this looks like. I know what happens when an animal is taught to fear its own nature. It breaks, and I can't. I will not stand here and watch you break. She left. Not dramatically, not with a door slam or a declaration. She walked down the corridor with her rope still over her shoulder and her braid coming undone and her back very straight and her breathing very even, and she did not look back. And Everett stood against the wall with his hands in fists and his wolf silent, completely, devastatingly silent, and watched her go. He did not chase her. Tarn said nothing. For the first time in 28 years, the wolf who had an opinion about everything, about gates and birds and moles and bench maintenance, had no opinion about this. The silence was total, not hurt, not angry, just empty. The emptiness of a wolf who had been told for the first time that someone believed in him, and had then watched his human prove them wrong. 5 days until the vote. The trainer who was supposed to prove the wolf could be trusted was walking out of the palace with her rope over her shoulder. Marsh had watched the gold flicker in the king's eyes less than an hour ago. And Tarn, the animal whose case Everett was supposed to be making, whose future depended on demonstrating restraint and direction and the capacity for control, Tarn was silent. Tarn had stopped trying. She packed, methodically. She left written instructions for each of the 7 horses, detailed, specific, the kind of notes that assumed the next handler would need to start from scratch. She left a schedule for the bay mare, who had finally started eating with a person in the room. She did not leave notes for the wolf. At the cabin, 2 miles out, forest edge, borrowed from a woodcutter who didn't ask questions, She unpacked and immediately noticed that her hands smelled like iron and pine. His scent. On her fingers, in the lines of her palms, from the day's session when she'd adjusted his jaw and his pulse had been under her thumb, and his eyes had gone gold, and she had stood there pretending her own heartbeat wasn't doing the exact same thing. She washed her hands twice. Iron and pine stayed. Wolves left marks that soap didn't reach. "You could go back," Thistle said, flat. The way Thistle said everything. "I'm not going back. He chose the cage. I can't choose it for him." "You're crying." "I'm not crying. My face is doing a thing. It's unrelated." "Your face is doing a thing, where water comes out of your eyes. That's called crying. I've seen you do it once before, and it was about a horse, and the horse was dying." "He is not dying. He is being an idiot." These are different situations requiring different tears. Josie pressed her hands over her face, the hands that smelled like him, iron and pine and cold mountain air, the scent that had become, over 3 weeks, the background frequency of every room she walked into. And she did not go back. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of the woodcutter's cabin, and her body kept doing things without her permission. Turning toward the side of the bed where he would be if he were here, which he wasn't, because there was no bed where he would be, because they had never shared a bed, because they had shared a training yard and a fence rail and approximately 9 inches of charged air between their knuckles, and that was all. And somehow, that was enough to make the absence feel architectural. "His heartbeat was at 62 beats per minute when you were touching his jaw," Thistle said into the dark. "I counted. You counted too. You count his heartbeat. That's not a professional observation. That's a symptom. Go to sleep, Thistle." "I don't sleep when you don't sleep. That's how this works. You stare at the ceiling, I stare at the ceiling. We're both miserable, efficient." She was falling for him. She had been falling for him since the breathing exercise, since the bench slat presented like a love letter by a wolf the size of a small horse. She was falling for a man who hated half of himself, and she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had spent her life with frightened animals, that you cannot love someone into trusting themselves. They have to do that alone. You can show them the door, but they have to walk through it. And if they won't, you have to leave. Because staying means watching them choose the cage, and watching them choose the cage will break you the way the cage broke them. "You could tell him," Thistle said. "Tell him what?" "That you're in love with him, that the wolf isn't the only one who's been bringing gifts." "That's not going to help." "I didn't say it would help. I said you could tell him." She left at dawn. The courtyard was empty. The gate was still in pieces. The lavender in the herbalist's plot was growing back, and in the stable, the bay mare pressed her nose against the stall door and watched her go. 3 days. The first day, Everett held council. Normal, managed, the architecture intact. Nobody noticed anything different. The second day, the bay mare stopped eating. Gil reported it without commentary. The horse had been making progress, letting people in the stall, eating in their presence, moving toward the door instead of away from it. Now she was back in the corner, trembling. The third day, Everett shifted alone. Protocol. Handlers at intervals. Ropes. Tarn appeared in the training yard and sat down. He didn't lunge at the fence. He didn't chase birds. He didn't bring gifts or dig defensive perimeters or attempt to fix anything. He sat in the middle of the yard where she had stood, where the ground still held the ghost of her scent, and he was still. Gil watched from the fence. He's not moving. Tarn was not moving. Tarn was sitting in the place where Josie had taught him to sit, and he was waiting, the way a dog waits by a door that someone left through, with the patient, bewildered loyalty of an animal who does not understand departure. Come back, Tarn said. To the empty yard, to the air, to the scent that was fading. Come back, come back, come back. Everett shifted back, stood in the yard in human form. His hands were at his sides. His jaw was locked. His eyes were dry, and the gold was gone, and the part of him that managed everything had managed this, too. Filed it, categorized it, processed it through the formal channels of governance and composure, and the specific administrative procedure of a man who has lost something and is choosing not to name it. But his hands were fists. And in the late gray light of the third day without her, standing in a training yard that smelled like lavender and absinthe, Everett Croft put his head in his hands and made a sound that was not a word, and was not a howl, and was not anything that had a name. And Tarn made the same sound, and they were the same sound, because they had always been the same person, and the person was alone. She said, "We're not broken," Tarn said. Quiet. Lost. She said, "We're not broken," and then we proved her wrong. Chapter 5. The Whole Wolf. The storm came on the fourth night. Not a gentle storm, the kind that arrives with a wall of wind and a sky the color of iron, and rains so thick it erases the courtyard in sheets. Lightning cracked across the valley, and the thunder followed 2 seconds later, which meant it was close, which meant the horses were already screaming. Everett heard it from his study, the high, panicked sounds of animals in a building they no longer trusted, the building with the cracked wall and the broken gate, and the scent of a wolf that had been ripping pieces off it for months. The stable that his wolf had weakened, bit by bit, through a year of helpful destruction. The wall that the mason had said wouldn't survive one more incident. The lightning hit the ridge above the palace, and the thunder was immediate, and the eastern wall of the stable cracked. Not collapsed, cracked. A sound like a ship's hull breaking, a groan of stone and timber giving way, and then a gap, a section of wall peeling outward into the storm, and the horses were in there, all 7, and the stalls were shifting and the roof beams were creaking, and the handlers were at the stable door, but the horses were too panicked to be led, too frightened to move toward the people who were trying to save them. Gil was shouting protocols. The handlers were shouting at the horses. The horses were not listening to anyone because they were animals in a collapsing building, and no protocol in the world could override the simple biological fact that the ceiling was falling. Everett ran, not to the handlers, to the courtyard, to the open ground in front of the stable where the rain was hammering the stone, and the broken gate pieces were scattered like bones. He shifted. Not the way he had always shifted, the controlled version, the managed version, the version with handlers and ropes and containment protocols, and the specific administrative procedure for allowing a dangerous animal to exist in a measured space for a measured time. He just let go. The shift was fast, a breath, a surrender, a dropping of every lock and every wall and every brick of the architecture he had been building since he was 15 years old. And then he was Tarn, and Tarn was him. And for the first time in 28 years, the wolf did not surge or fight or push, because there was nothing to push against. The door was open. The cage was gone. There was just one animal, one mind, one body, standing in the rain with gold eyes and silver-gray fur plastered flat by the storm, and the absolute certain knowledge of what needed to happen next. "Oh," Tarn said. Quiet. Stunned. The cheerful register gone, replaced by something deeper, something that had been waiting underneath all the gates and branches and bench slats. "Oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like." He walked through the gap in the cracked eastern wall, stone dust and rain falling around him, into the stable. Not charged, not lunged, walked. The way Josie walked toward frightened animals. Slow, deliberate, every line of his body saying the same thing. "I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to chase you. I am going to be here. The horses saw him, the largest predator in the kingdom, standing in the gap where the wall had been, rain pouring through behind him, blocking the opening with his body. He was not growling. He was not baring teeth. He was still. Completely, profoundly still. The way she had taught him. The kind of still that told a scared animal, "The threat is behind me, and I am between you and it." The bay mare was in the far stall, pressed into the corner, trembling. Tarn walked to her, slowly. He stopped at the stall door. He lay down. 160 pounds of wolf, lying on the wet stone floor of a collapsing stable, making himself small, making himself less. Putting his enormous head on his enormous paws, and looking up at the bay mare with gold eyes that said, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But I'm not going anywhere. And the thing that's falling isn't going to reach you, because I'm here. And being here is the thing I was always supposed to be doing. I'm helping, Tarn said, very quiet. Not the bright helpful that destroyed gates and chased birds. The real one. The one that had been there all along, underneath the catastrophic enthusiasm, waiting for someone to show him what helping actually looked like. I'm helping by not moving. She taught me that. She taught us that. The mare stopped trembling. She lowered her head. She took one step forward. The other horses followed, one by one, moving toward the wolf instead of away from him, pressing closer instead of bolting, because the largest predator in the room was telling them, with every fiber of his still and steady body, that the storm was outside and he was inside, and the two were not going to meet. Gil got the ropes on. The handlers led the horses out. The stable groaned and the eastern wall gave way entirely, stones and timber crashing into the space where the stalls had been, and the wolf was the last one out, walking through the rain with stone dust on his silver coat, and the bay mare's lead rope in his mouth because she wouldn't let anyone else guide her. He brought the mare to the sheltered yard. He set the rope down. He sat. The handlers stared. Gil stared. The rain poured down and the stable was rubble behind him. And the wolf sat in the storm with 7 calm horses around him. And the look on his enormous face was not pride. It was not triumph. It was the simple, devastating peace of an animal who had finally been allowed to do the thing he was made for. Marsh was there. He'd come when the storm hit. Of course he had. The man whose daughter's horse had died in a stable incident would come when lightning cracked a stable wall. He was standing at the edge of the courtyard in the rain, and he had watched the whole thing. The wolf walking into a collapsing building. The wolf lying down in front of a terrified horse. The largest predator in the kingdom making himself small, so that the scared things around him could come closer. He looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at him. Gold eyes, steady, rain-soaked. Marsh said nothing. He stood in the rain for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to the palace, and the set of his shoulders was different from the way it had been when he arrived. Josie was already running. She'd been 2 miles out when the storm hit. She hadn't left the territory. She'd taken a cabin at the forest edge. She'd told herself she needed space, but the space had been 3 days of staring at walls and not sleeping. When the lightning hit the ridge and the thunder shook the cabin walls, she'd known. The stable, the cracked wall, the horses. She was running before she finished the thought. Boots on, rope on, door open, gone. We're running back, Thistle observed. Flat, neutral. The same register she'd used to report the weather. For the horses. For the horses, at 2 a.m, in a storm. 2 miles, for the horses. Thistle. I'm just confirming the official reason. For the record. In case anyone asks why we're sprinting through a forest in the dark. Horses, absolutely. No other reason. She came through the palace gate at a dead run, with her braids soaked flat and her boots heavy with mud, and her rope still over her shoulder, because some things you carry even when you're running towards something instead of away from it. She stopped at the edge of the courtyard. The wolf was there, in the rain, surrounded by horses. Sitting. Not the wolf she'd left, not the wolf who chased birds and destroyed gates and brought her bench slats with the desperate, cheerful energy of an animal that didn't know what it was doing, but wanted very much to do it correctly. This wolf was still. This wolf was settled. This wolf was the whole animal, the one she'd been trying to show him, the one that had been hiding behind a year of catastrophic helpfulness because nobody had ever told him that being still was the bravest thing a strong creature could do. He was beautiful. She'd known the wolf was beautiful. She'd known it since the first night in the courtyard, when she'd put her hand on his muzzle and felt the fear go out of him. But that wolf had been performing for her, trying to be good, trying to earn it, trying to bring her enough branches and logs and bench slats to prove he was worth something. This wolf wasn't performing. This wolf was just being what it was, and what it was a protector. He saw her. The gold eyes found her through the rain. His ears went forward, his tail moved, once, twice, restrained and hopeful, and not at all sure she was staying. She stood in the rain. He sat in the rain. Between them, the courtyard. Behind him, a collapsed stable and 7 calm horses. The gap between them was 30 feet and 4 days and 3 weeks of breathing exercises and 1 argument in a corridor and a straw in her braid and the whole complicated, devastating fact of 2 people who had been trying very hard not to be what they so obviously were. He shifted back. Standing in the rain in the wreckage of his own stable. Stone dust on his shoulders, a cut on his hand from a beam. His pale blue eyes were gold, not a ring at the edges, not a flash, full gold, both of them. Tarn right at the surface, and not hidden, and not managed, and not locked away behind a single brick of the architecture she'd been watching him build for 3 weeks. "You came back," he said. "I came back for the horses." "You came back for the horses. Primarily." "Primarily," Thistle repeated. She ran 2 miles in a thunderstorm for the horses. "Primarily. I want to die." Something happened to his mouth, not a smile, the tectonic movement that comes before one. A shift in the geology of a face that had been managed for so long that smiling felt like a structural event. She walked toward him. Not fast. The way she walked toward everything. Steady, visible, letting him see her coming, letting him decide. He stood in the rain and his hands were at his sides and they were open. Not fists, not curled, open, palms out. The hands of a man who had stopped holding himself shut. And he watched her come the way a man watches the only thing he has ever wanted walk toward him through a storm. She stopped in front of him. Rain on both of them. The courtyard was a disaster. The stable was rubble. There was a horse standing behind him like a very large, very reliable piece of furniture. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart. The same place, the same hand, the same touch. But not the same. Not clinical, not a training exercise. Her palm flat against his soaked linen shirt, with his heartbeat fast and strong, and running at a pace that was not managed, was not controlled, was just the honest animal rhythm of a man whose wolf, and whose body, and whose whole self were, for the first time, the same speed. "Your heart's doing the thing," she said. "I know. You're not trying to slow it down. No." She kissed him. She kissed him the way she did everything, directly, without asking permission, with the full weight of 3 weeks of standing in yards and corridors and stables, with her hands on his body pretending it was professional, with the full weight of leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back, not for the horses, never for the horses, always for him. She kissed him and his hands came up, open, not fists, one to her jaw and one to the small of her back, and he pulled her in with the careful, devastating gentleness of a man who had spent 28 years restraining every instinct and had just, in a collapsing stable with 7 panicked horses, discovered what his instincts were actually for. The rain hammered down, his hand on her jaw, thumb at the hinge where she'd placed her own thumb a dozen times. Her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat, fast, right, both engines at the same speed. The clover honey and the iron and pine and the rain washing everything clean. His mouth on hers and hers on his, and the world narrowing to the specific, unbearable fact of 2 people who had stopped pretending. Yes, Tarn said, not a shout, not an announcement, a settling. The sound a wolf makes when it finally lies down in a place it's going to stay. Yes, that, her, yes. About time, Thistle said, flat, dry. The deadpan register that Josie loved because it meant Thistle was feeling something she didn't have the vocabulary for and was covering it with structure. 3.5 weeks. I expected better of both of us. They broke apart, foreheads together, rain between them. His hand on her jaw and her hand on his chest, and the horses calm behind them and the storm beginning, just beginning, to ease. I'm not staying because you need fixing, she said. You're not broken, you never were. His breath caught. Not a gasp, a held thing, released. The sound of a man hearing something he has needed to hear since before he knew he needed it. She was right, he said. His voice was wrecked, not performatively wrecked, not the managed version of emotion, genuinely, quietly, completely undone, the voice of a man who has no architecture left and is standing in the rain with nothing between himself and the weather. You were right, every time. About the breathing. About the cage. About him. He pressed his forehead harder against hers. I spent 28 years trying to keep him out. He wasn't trying to get in, he was already there. I know. I know you know. I'm saying it because I haven't, and I should have. And I'm sorry, not for the wolf, for me. For choosing the lock every time you showed me the door was already open. She put both hands on his face. Looked at him. His eyes were gold and wet, and the rain was running down both of them, and behind him a horse was eating grass from the courtyard crack. And the world was in ruins, and he was the most beautiful ruin in it. Say it again, she said. The part about the door. The door was always open, and I'm done locking it. Later, hours later. The storm had passed, the evening was cool and washed clean, and the sky was doing the thing skies do after violence, going impossibly clear, impossibly deep, as if trying to apologize for the damage. They were in his study, the fire was lit. She was in his chair, she'd sat in it first, and he hadn't asked her to move because she looked like she belonged in it. Because everything she sat in or leaned on or put her hand against started to look like it had been waiting for her. The fire was warm. The study smelled like cedar smoke from the hearth and rain from their hair and the particular blend of them, iron and pine and clover honey and hay. That had become, over 3 weeks, the scent of something neither of them had a decree for. She stood up. She crossed to where he was standing by the window. She put her hands on his shoulders and turned him to face her, and the firelight caught the gold in his eyes, and the warmth of her brown ones. And for a moment they just looked at each other, without pretense, without the training yard frame, without any of the carefully maintained professional distance that had been the thinnest wall either of them had ever built. She bared the curve of her shoulder, deliberate, pulling the collar of her shirt to the side with one hand, exposing the skin between her neck and her shoulder. The firelight fell across it. Do you know what this is? She said. His breath stopped. His whole body stopped. The gold in his eyes flared and steadied. Yes. Do you know what it means? It means you're choosing to stay. It means I'm choosing all of you. Not the managed version, not the king version, the whole wolf. The room was silent. The fire cracked. Outside, the last of the storm was draining from the sky. He stepped forward. He lowered his head. His mouth was at the curve of her shoulder, his breath warm against her skin, and he paused there, not hesitating, holding, letting the moment exist before he changed it. The firelight was on her skin, and his breath was on her skin, and she could feel Tarn at the surface, not surging, not cheerful, just present, just there. An enormous, steady warmth pressed against the inside of his ribs, waiting with a patience the wolf had never demonstrated for anything else in his entire chaotic life. His lips brushed her shoulder first, barely a touch. Then his jaw opened, and she felt his teeth, and the bite was slow, so careful, not with the care of restraint, but with the care of reverence, the way you handle something that is being given to you and that you know you will never deserve, and that you are going to spend the rest of your life trying to be worthy of. Her hand tightened in his hair. His hands on her waist pulled her closer, and the mark settled into her skin like a word that had been waiting to be said, and the bond completed. Not with a crash, but with a click. The quiet, specific sound of two things fitting together that had always been the right shape for each other. Tarn howled. Not the managed howl, not the contained one, the real one. The one that shook the windows and rattled the study door and made the guards in the corridor reach for their weapons, and woke up Gil, who sat up in bed, listened, and went back to sleep. Because he had been managing this wolf for 9 years, and he knew the difference between a howl that meant trouble and a howl that meant the opposite. "Thistle," Tarn said. Not a whisper, not contained. The full volume of an enormous wolf who had finally been allowed to feel the thing he was feeling without a single wall between himself and the force of it. "Thistle, Thistle, Thistle." "I know," Thistle said, flat, deadpan, unmoved. Except she wasn't unmoved. Under the register, under the bored bystander surface, there was something warm and steady and permanent, like bedrock, like the thing that doesn't shift when everything above it does. "I know, you enormous disaster, I know." Josie laughed. Against his shoulder, into the mark she'd earned, into the place where his shirt was damp from rain and his skin was warm from fire, and his heartbeat was the speed she'd set it to 3 weeks ago. She laughed, and it was the best sound he had ever heard. Better than the howl, better than anything. He held her. She held him. The fire burned. The study was warm. The storm was gone. The wolf was home. The vote was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Marsh withdrew the petition at 8. He did it formally, read into the record, witnessed by the full council. New evidence. No longer believes permanent confinement serves the kingdom's interests. No one asked what the new evidence was. Half the council had heard the stable story by breakfast. Marsh caught Everett's eye as the session closed. He gave one short nod. Not warm, not forgiving, but honest, which was better. His daughter came to the stable the following week. She was 14, and she didn't say anything, and she stood at the fence while Tarn, shifted, enormous, sitting with the terrible self-conscious dignity of a wolf who knows he is being watched, held very still. She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached through the fence and put her hand on his muzzle, briefly, the way Josie had that first night. The touch of someone who has decided that the thing that cost her something is not the same as the thing that is in front of her now. Tarn sat. He didn't move. He didn't wag. He just let her touch him, and his gold eyes were steady, and for once in his entire catastrophic life, being still was easy. The stable took 3 weeks to rebuild. Tarn helped. Helped remained a generous word. The first morning, Tarn, in full wolf form, enormous, silver gray, utterly committed, carried a beam from the lumber pile to the construction site, in his mouth. The beam was 12 feet long and weighed as much as a grown man, and the wolf carried it the way a Labrador carries a branch, with visible pride, with his tail doing the thing, with the clear expectation that everyone around him would stop what they were doing and acknowledge the magnificence of what had just occurred. He deposited it next to the foundation, reasonably close to where it needed to go, approximately. He went back, got another beam, deposited it, approximately. He went back, got a third beam, carried it past the construction site, through the courtyard, and deposited it in the herb garden. The herbalist came out, looked at the beam, looked at the wolf, and went back inside. Josie watched from the fence with a mug of something warm in her hands, and the morning light on her face, and the mark at the curve of her shoulder visible at the edge of her collar. Everett stood next to her. His hand was on the fence rail, close to hers, not touching, an inch between their fingers. The inch was deliberate, a private game. Who would close it first? It was always him. His fingers would bridge the gap, and his hand would cover hers, and Tarn would feel it, wherever he was in the yard, and the wolf would pause mid-beam carry and go very still, and Josie could swear the wolf smiled, which wolves do not do, except this one did. "He's never going to get better at this, is he?" Josie said. "No." "Good." She leaned against him. His arm came around her, easy, open-handed, the arm of a man who no longer curled his fingers inward. The bay mare was in the temporary paddock, eating from a trough, watching the wolf with the calm disinterest of a horse who had decided that this particular predator was furniture. Tarn came back with a fourth beam. He paused in the middle of the courtyard. He looked at Josie. He looked at the construction site. He looked at the garden. He looked at Josie again. He carried the beam to the garden, set it next to the other one, sat down. "I helped," Tarn said, earnest, certain, radiant. "Look, I helped. The garden needed beams." "It didn't," Fissel said. "It did. It's a structural improvement. She'll love it." "She will not love it. The herbalist is going to have concerns." "The herbalist has no vision. This garden has never had beams. That's the problem. I fixed it." Josie pressed her face into Everett's shoulder and laughed. The sound was warm and real and unhidden, the laugh of a woman who had spent her life with difficult animals and had finally found the most difficult one of all and had decided, with full knowledge and open eyes, that this was the one worth staying for. Everett held her. His hands were open. His jaw was relaxed. His eyes were pale blue with gold at the edges, permanent now. The wolf not surfacing and sinking, but simply present. Simply there, part of the same face, the same man, the same whole and undivided creature that had learned, in a collapsing stable, in a rainstorm, under the hands of a woman who smelled like clover honey, that the bravest thing a strong animal can do is be still. The garden now had beams. The herbalist would adjust. The kingdom would hold. The gate eventually would be rebuilt, and if it creaked again, in 6 months or a year, and if Tarn decided to fix it again in his own particular way, well, Josie would be there. She'd tell him to sit down, he'd sit, and the world would be fine, because the world had always been fine, and the wolf had never been the problem. Hold the fence, but hold someone's hand on it.